One of the most important of the findings that we have gathered through the conversations that Jerlene has led us in with our business neighbors, in particular up and down the Freeport corridor, is a widespread desire. Did I miss yours? Okay, I'm sorry. A widespread desire to improve our relationships with law enforcement. That probably doesn't surprise you. I don't know if it does, but back in the day, there was something called community policing. Do you remember that? But it was ended in around 1990 when federal dollars were cut off for that from at least here in Sacramento. But it should not surprise us that following the fatal shooting of Stephen Clark, unarmed, by the police, that there was a huge firestorm of what I think is pent-up protest. Not that incident alone, but so many others. That it's a good thing to hear that people are interested in improving what is, of course, a charged relationship that we have with law enforcement. Because it is a relationship that needs improvement, that needs to be better than what we have today. Something to remember, everybody liked these fellows, right? But then nothing much ever happened in Mayberry. It's amazing to me how many police shows there have been, right? And they have changed very dramatically. From this, along came the detectives who really had our respect for all that they could do with just the facts, ma'am. Right? Remember? But then around 1970, along came Serpico and just shattered all of what we probably had was an implicitly positive bias for law enforcement. Gone. We had a look inside New York City Police Department, right? We've come a long ways in our relationship with law enforcement, and now we have reality shows, including this one. Honestly, I don't even know what to say. I don't. Pew Research has kind of taken our temperature, which is really helpful, on our relationship with law enforcement. And the choices they gave people were cold, neutral, or warm. Okay? So they determined that in the United States, Euro-Americans, 74%, that would be the total of adding warm and neutral. Only 7% cold relationship with law enforcement. Anyone surprised? Young Euro-Americans, however, 30% cold. Very different perspective by age, right? African Americans, I should have added cold plus neutral, but 30% cold, which sounds low to me. But young African Americans, 46% cold. That does not surprise me. Latinos were about roughly half and half. Half warm, half cold and neutral. And unfortunately, there were no other ethnic groups such as Pacific Islanders or Asians or Southeast Asians or Middle Easterners. There were no results for those, but I'd be awfully curious to know what those relationships are like. And then they also, in a completely different Pew Research survey, asked about our perception of whether police officers behave unethically. 61% is the combined categories of some of the time and most of the time. Isn't that alarmingly high? That's perception. That doesn't mean but perception matters, doesn't it? Well, I was kind of stunned by that until I saw this. 69%. We beat the police as clergy on people's poor opinion of us. We'll deal with that in a different sermon. But how about this? 81% feel the members of Congress behave unethically most or some of the time. Ouch. Now, see, no one's surprised. So one could say that in general, we lack confidence, right, in government, period. That's not healthy, is it? Doesn't benefit anyone. Back in April of 2018, Mayor Steinberg asked Chief Hahn to create a genuine neighborhood policing program. He changed it from community intentionally to neighborhood. Okay, so the conversation about neighborhood policing now has started up again in Sacramento. But I can tell you that I read from a professor of the police academy here that community policing course is less than half a day. And not only that, but currently police officers view a beat assignment, walking a neighborhood, as a demotion. And police forces often use beat assignments as a place to put people who are not performing well in other areas. There's a need here, isn't there? So we know that when the police chief Hahn was interviewed by Capital Public Radio, I don't know if any of you, this was kind of an old interview now, but by Beth Ruyak, he said this about our force. I would say we are absolutely, unequivocally a community-oriented police department. Now that may be aspirational. It may be your experience, it may not be. But I thought it would be really important for us to understand how he views what policing should be here in Sacramento. Not everybody agrees, and one of whom has spoken out is Pastor Les Simmons, who is a member of ACT. ACT is the Area Congregations Together. And it was shortly after the Stephen Clark shooting, when all of the dialogues were happening, he said this: our community wants guardians in policing, not warriors. Not warriors. So we know that the community wants something different. You have heard it said, everybody just needs to respect law enforcement and obey all the laws. But I say to you, it's going to take all of us together, a whole community, to bring our relationship with law enforcement in line with the beloved community that God calls us to be. All of us. All of us. And for that, we need to turn to Jesus. Jesus was no stranger to law enforcement, was he? Let's remember. He was constantly evading the temple guards, right? Because he was constantly violating the rules. But they did finally catch up with him, didn't they? But it took a betrayer. And then he was taken to the temple court and tried there in what many scholars would consider an illegal trial today, like an arraignment. And of course, his people at the time were the subjects to a foreign power. Rome made the rules. No matter what the temple officials might say, Rome made the rules. And the fact is, Jesus and pretty much all his followers suffered the brutality of law enforcement in his time. In this passage from Matthew, if you recognize, it comes from that group that we call the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus really puts it to the people. He raises the bar on everybody. When he uses this language, and it's over and over again, I don't know if you covered this already in your Matthew class, Dave. When Jesus says, "You have heard it said," and then he follows up with, "But I say to you," what he's doing is he's quoting first something straight out of Torah, right? The sacred commandments of God, the Word of God. And then he adds to it. Can you imagine the temerity of that? How people heard that? You know this, but I'm adding this. Adding, not erasing in any way. In no way, shape, or form does Jesus ever disavow anything from the words of life in the Hebrew Scriptures. He does not leave them behind. He says, I fulfill them. And if you are in my covenant community, we're doing even more. Even more. Moses never raised the bar, right? He just handed over the rule of life. But Jesus says, but I say to you. So this is all about anger, right? This particular passage. If you murder someone, Jesus says, expect to find yourself in court before a judge. That's what's going to happen. That's the rule of law, right? That's the covenant, the first covenant, what we try not to call the 10 Commandments, the 10 words of life. Thou shalt not murder, kill. Then Jesus says, but I say to you, if you even think it, you're already guilty in the court of God. Wow. If you even think it, or something nasty comes out of your mouth, where did it come from? You're already convicted. That's what Jesus is saying. So I thought it might be helpful for us, having heard what Jesus expects of us in relationship to others that we may or may not be angry with or have a bone to pick with, right? Jesus says if someone, notice this, sometimes we think of it backward. Jesus says if someone has an issue with you, before you go to the altar to give your gift, right? You go talk to them and make it right. He doesn't say if you're mad at someone. No, if they're mad at you, you take the initiative. So I thought, well, maybe we need to take the initiative then with law enforcement. So let's start with a really brief conversation with Chief Han, shall we? A virtual dialogue, knowing that we need to make it a real one. In his interview, Chief Han said, it's a tough job, policing. And it's even tougher now because the demands are higher than ever before. How many of you agree it's harder? Boy, I sure do. I sure do. For so many reasons we could talk about, but it seems like we all agree. It's harder now. This is not Mayberry, and Mayberry is not coming back. And so maybe there's help that is needed, right? There are needs. He also said this, suppose you grew up in Granite Bay. We get that? but then are placed as a police officer in Del Paso Heights. All you know, basically, he says, is what you've seen on television, is there are gangs and shootings there. Well, I'm encouraged because it seems to me that he has some understanding of implicit bias and how real it is and how it affects everything we all do, right? He understands. And then he also says, when you walk into a room as a police officer, whether positive or negative, you have everybody's attention. How true, right? All eyes. You see flashing lights. What's going on? What was that?
Why are they here?
Yeah, why are they here? What's going on? Something's not right, right? We're all on alert when we see a police officer. What kind of attention do we give police officers, law enforcement in general, other than when we feel the need to call? I think that's something we need to think about. With that comes a lot of responsibility, doesn't it, though? When you command that kind of attention and the ability to change lives for the better. I would agree. And that's why we call them, isn't it? Our hope is that when they arrive, somebody's life is going to get better. That's our common agreement around the function of law enforcement, that life will be better with some intervention. I like this quote. We're looking for people who see their job as working to improve the quality of life for everyone. That said, when there is a shooting in a school, for instance, something inside you has to say, run towards the danger while everyone else is running the opposite way. Do you have that expectation of your law enforcement officers? We expect them to be courageous, utterly courageous. Where does courage like that come from? Where would it come from in you? A desire to protect those you love? Maybe, yeah, huh? To protect those you respect? Then how will we grow that? How do we help that happen in law enforcement? Let me share with you 3 community programs that Chief Hahn has put in place, that are in place right now. One is the Peace Walk. I was really surprised to hear about this because I really didn't know. But for 6 years, every Friday, officers go to Oak Park and meet with community leaders there, and they walk around the neighborhood, being introduced by the community to business leaders, to neighbors, just knock on doors and say hello. 6 years that's been going on. I don't know that anything like that has ever happened in Hollywood Park. And then there's a day of service when 32 graduates of the academy are sent out across the city, having asked ahead of time, for neighbors, what would you like us to do? We're here to help. And whatever people name is what they will go out and do. Day of service. This is this past year's March for the Dream. And Emma Fotu, y'all may remember, and Sarah, that as we walked this year, we walked directly behind 2 officers. The whole way, right? Pretty much the whole way. And now I'm feeling badly because I didn't take any initiative to speak with them. And I didn't notice anyone else either. They talked to each other pretty much the whole way. So next year, I think I know what my job is. But this program called Walk in My Shoes, I think is rather impressive. What they do is 2 officers are partnered with 2 community leaders, and they meet together and talk and get to know each other. The community leaders lead them through their neighborhood, whichever neighborhood that is, introducing them to people. But then a month after that, they go on a ride along with the officers. And then a month after that, they get back together again to talk about what's needed in the relationship between the police and the community. Wow. I wonder what it takes to be on the list. Walk in my shoes. Goes both ways, doesn't it? Understand me and what I'm faced with. Here's my place of hope. He says, a lot of this falls on the police department, though. We have to evolve and change the way we do certain things and relate to people. In addition, we need the community to make being a police officer a good thing. Now, I get caught a little bit there because I feel like, well, whose responsibility is that? And yet I know we have a role in it, don't we? How do we teach our kids and help them see law enforcement as a good thing? A lot of it depends on how they respond, but a lot of it depends on how we respond. And then he says, you don't solve that with equipment. You know, a lot of people call for, give them this, give them tasers, give them, Uzis, give them armored vehicles, give them all of these things. He says, you don't solve that with equipment, you solve that with relationships. And that's where I hear the voice of Jesus. You solve that with relationships. And relationships are two-way streets. So I would leave you with this question, Centennial. What can we contribute to building beloved community with law enforcement? What do we have to share? What information do we need to share? What do we need to learn from law enforcement? What do we want them to learn from us? This is why we're connecting outside these walls, so that we can learn, what does Jesus expect us to do in response to the needs, the very real needs that we have, not just as individuals, but as community. Salt and light. People who initiate the change, who make the difference. That's who we're called to be. Will you spend some time this week, maybe when you see law enforcement at work, say a prayer for those they are serving and for those who serve. And ask God, what's my role? What's my role?